The tarot has been called the Book of Life for thousands of years, and even though its symbols are all around us, it's only the people in the know that have taken advantage of its power. But that is changing, and it's scholars like Michael Tsarion, creator and founder of taroscopic astrology, who are enabling us on a grassroots level to empower ourselves with the divination arts of the tarot. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Last time we spoke about the history and the origin of the tarot, but this evening we would like you to speak about tarot and its relation to the goddess. The image of the goddess seems to be really permeating throughout all of the cards. Can you speak to us about that?
Yes, that is correct. If anybody even glances at the major arcana in the tarot deck, they'll see the image of the goddess all the way through it. And I brought out before that even the word tarot, T-A-R-O-T, is actually one of the earliest names of the goddess.
Right.
I mean, 10,000, 25,000 years we're talking here.
25,000?
At least. The name of the goddess was Taru or Tarut. Then this goddess, as the dynasties and cults changed, she became known by different names. Her next name was Nuth. Then she became known as Mayat. And then she became known as Hathor. Then later Isis, Lilith even. In the Babylonian period, and then Inanna, Sophia. As you move more into the Christian period, the Gnostic Christian period, she becomes known as Sophia, even Circe, and then down into the modern Christian era, she becomes known as Mary, Mary the Madonna. But the primeval, original Madonna was Tarut. And this word Tarut is very interesting actually for people who are interested in words, because when you pronounce the Tarut with a soft H, you get Taruth, or truth.
Right.
Which is a modern word, truth, that we associate with factuality, and that's exactly right in a way, because when you turn to the tarot to have a reading, truth is what you're looking for. In fact, the word church also derives directly from the word tarot. When the T's became pronounced with CH in the Anglo-Saxon, that's CH instead of T. You put CH on either side of taruch, and you get charuch, or church.
Oh, church, yes.
So actually the word church, and even the word thought, if people are into this, they can discover that even the word thought derived from the word church. And that's interesting that the word church represents the female goddess, because you'll even hear the Pope talking about Holy Mother Church. And now you know why that they're mentioning that, and you know where that title comes from, because literally church is the name of the goddess, the very word.
So there's also certain numerology connected to the goddess force as well, isn't there?
Oh yeah, very much so. Cards, for instance, feature numerology. The divination arts, numerology is a very important divination art. And really, if you think about it, all number is associative with the goddess force. In fact, the entire scientific concept or forte is absolutely unthinkable without the presence of the goddess. A lot of people associate goddess worship with something new agey and unscientific, and you know, very much separated from science. But actually, you couldn't even think of science without the goddess, and I'll be happy to explain why that is. Because whether you're talking about Gaelic Ireland, whether you're talking about you know, the Bronze Age Sumeria, or you're talking about the Etruscans or the Mycenaeans or the Egyptians, or the Chaldeans or the Scandinavians, or the Greeks or the Romans, no matter which of these cultures you're talking about, you're dealing, they have their origins in the matriarchal culture, which, as I said, goes back a lot before the Bronze Age. Western scientists will just talk about the Bronze Age, but actually they have to admit that it goes much further back than that. And it was discovered in ancient times when people started to really get it into their heads that there was a universal order. It was noticed that there was a mathematical and geometrical order in the universe, something that could be measured and contemplated. And the reason why this was discovered was directly because of the female. The female cycle, gestative cycle, was in such synchronicity with the movement of the moon and the earth and the stars that it suddenly people twigged on that there is a universal mathematical order that we can contemplate and understand. But from that point on, it was never forgot that it was through the woman's body that that knowledge came to man. So therefore, we couldn't even talk about science today, mathematics, numbering, or any of that stuff without understanding the nature of the goddess. So therefore the female body and the goddess and the woman became then the symbol of the God force. It became the symbol of the universe, and that there is a universal order. And as I said, Christians still speak of Holy Mother Church. And even priests and potentates will wear the flowing robes. People don't think anything of this, but you'll find that all people in positions of authority will wear the flowing robes, and this is because they're presenting themselves. They're basing themselves on the female or on a higher level androgyny, because when you really get into the goddess understanding of what that is, it's not so much about gender, it's about the concept of androgyny, which is a magical principle.
About female and male merging.
Absolutely right. And so it's not so much, as I said, about gender, it's something higher than that. But on a lower level, it is about the nature of feminine and masculine, male and female. But the goddess was pictured or imaged by the ancients in three basic ways. As I said, there's the female body. That was always a symbol of the goddess, obviously. Then there was the earth, right? The fact of the green, fertile earth became one of her primal symbols, or the moon also. But then the third one was the body, the night sky. One of the most ancient ones going back was the actual night sky itself. This passed for a very important image of the goddess, and therefore anything that happened in the sky, which any of the movements of the luminaries, this became, people would study this. So we have astronomy and astrology coming out of goddess worship. And, to do astronomy, you have to know navigation.
Right.
So again, we find this thing about mathematics and science. And in fact, people who are interested in words, as I said, one of the earliest goddess powers' name was Mayat, which in Sanskrit is the Mahat. And this is one of the reasons where the M-A turns up in certain words like mother, matriarch, muse, mandala, matrix, matter, matrimony, measure. All sorts of words like that, like mathematics, master, and matriculation. These words that have the prefix MA, and especially the word mathematics, is to measure forth. It meant to measure forth, because it was never forgot that in goddess worship the concept of measuring was a key thing. In fact, one was even called a master because it represented mastery in measurement.
Oh, I see.
So people couldn't even say they were a master. And in schools today, you're still given a star for matriculation.
Yes, absolutely.
All of this stuff comes back from the stellar cult of looking at the stars, mastering their motions, and then saying, oh, you're a very good student. You are now called a master and given a star. So, and then also another syllable that relates to the goddess is Anna. In the ancient days, Anna meant heavens, the body of the goddess. And look how many women's names today. In fact, names in general have the term Anne or Anna in it. Annabelle. There's so many Anna, the name, and this is why there's so many names that have these terms. But there are hundreds of numbers and words that derive from periods when the lunar and the stellar cults proliferated on Earth.
So when did the goddess worship suffer its decline? Because it did dramatically.
Well, yes, it did. And what happened was there were basically four great cults in the ancient world. The stellar cult, which has studied the stars. The lunar cult, which was more focused on the moon, and then there was the solar cult. And when the solar cult took over, it was mostly of a masculine paradigm, and there's several reasons for why goddess worship started to recede, but the solar cult basically took over, and they wanted to get rid of the dominion of the feminine Sophic, what we call the Sophic power. As I said, there's several reasons for this, but the goddess ceased to be a central figure in theocracy because human consciousness was actually changing. When you have a solar paradigm on Earth, it also has an implication for mental thought. And when cognition or thinking became what we call left hemispherical, which is what we're in today, then the feminine gets repressed. So throughout the world, in any culture where the goddess was supreme, was the matriarch, was the creatrix, she started to become secondary to the male god. Originally, the male god was always seen as her progeny, second to her. Right. But actually everything turned around, and the male becomes the alpha image, and she was relegated to the level of consort.
Of submission.
In fact, even worse. Sometimes the goddess was completely removed from divinity and made into a temptress, or even the femme fatale. And this is today why, when you think of God, you're thinking in terms of malehood, which was something, which is something completely unknown for millennia upon millennia. This is only something that's very recent in history, to think of God in male terms. A very, very recent phenomenon.
How would you say, how long, how many years has that taken
People
place?
are speculating all the time. Egyptologists, the ones who really know what they're doing, know that this cult, especially with this thing called the precession of the equinoxes, is a sort of a calendar for telling this. And goddess worship goes back at least 25,000 years. And the scholars are, saying that it goes back at least that far.
But the patriarchal religion started when?
Well, that's almost from the dawn of what we call history today.
I see.
You're going to see the goddess image suffering. You know, so right from the period of the Grecian and Roman times,
I
she's
see.
already taking a second place.
I see. And so, is this where Orthodox religion took over?
Yes, in ancient times, like I said, as the solar cult took over, they wanted to reduce the power of the female. And Orthodox religion is guilty of it. But to give you a concrete example, if you look at Hindu religion, which is very ancient, it's 7,000 years, they say, you're going to find that in the Hindu pantheon and cosmology, you have the famous creatrix. In the earliest times, they worshipped the goddess as the goddess Maya, Mahat, which is nothing but the Egyptian Mayat. They're the same concept. Ishwara, Prakriti, Shakti. These are all original goddess figures. But then you'll see them becoming appendages. You'll definitely see those becoming personifications subsidiary to their male gods. And in fact, this is why today, when you say the word Maya or Prakriti, if you're studying these subjects, those words are synonymous with darkness or a negativity or shadow. See, this was completely opposite, but this is what has happened now. And we find that these deities are still around because religion cannot thrive without the goddess. See, this is the problem that they're caught in, is that the religion becomes very sterile without the feminine, without the goddess. So they had to keep the image, but they certainly did not make any allowances for the dominion of it. It always was a secondary role.
Is this why the Christianity used the Madonna?
Yeah, the Madonna is again another
symbol?
Concession, really. All Orthodox religion has tried to get rid of the goddess image completely. I mean, in traditional religion today, women have absolutely no place. So obviously they tried their best to get rid of it completely, but then they found that their religion was very sterile. So then they had to keep the archetype alive because you can't, completely expurge it. But you could marginalize it, so that we get these parodies of femininity, like the Madonna. And also we get this pernicious idea that there's something weak about femininity. With this comes the whole idea, the whole cult, the whole movement, that femininity is something weak and meek, which is simply not true. Anyone in the occult traditions, anyone who does martial arts, anyone who's familiar with Taoism will know that this is absolutely not correct, that there's a great strength in the yin force.
Right, because yin is expansive, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there's many, yin is certainly not a weak thing.
Right.
In fact, it is the energy that sustains the universe. And the Christian Marys, both of them, Martha, Miriam, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Christ, all of these female figures in Orthodox religion are basically watered down, even corruptions of the original alma mater, what they call the alma mater. And a little research will certainly reveal the truth of this. But we really have to face it that Orthodox religion, like Judeo-Christianity, is basically antithetical to everything to do with the precepts of goddess faith. Really antithetical, and they have the book of Genesis, for instance, if you read that, there's a clear evidence, where the woman is responsible for the fall. This is what I mean by that.
What is the connection of the goddess energy to the individual in today's society?
Well, that's a good question, because again, it has to do with science. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who studied the subconscious drives of man, in pretty much the same way that Freud had done, discovered that there is a supreme mental archetype, something that dominates the unconscious and is behind all of the human drives. And he gave the name to this archetype, the anima, which is nothing but the goddess. So he discovered that the ultimate drive, the ultimate instinct, the ultimate archetypal force within the human consciousness is again the feminine. And it's an archetype that he gave the word anima. In fact, the word anima in Latin means to be animate, to be alive. So there's a lot of connotations here. And we see that people who have, when this archetype, any archetype, but especially this archetype, if this archetype gets repressed for some reason, as it is happening today, then there's great systemic disorder that comes about, and people who have psychological awareness can see the ramifications of this repression in society and in the individual. The whole world is suffering from it, and individuals are also suffering from it. So the repression of the feminine modality of thought is having the most pernicious effect on the earth and in individual life as well. The poet Coleridge, he said that all great minds are truly androgynous, and that's what he was talking about, because people who are scholars, people who are poetic and thinkers and philosophers have always understood the power of the anima and the feminine, and they want to balance with it. And the ancients who were in balance with it saw no separation in anything. See, in our world today of physics,
Yes.
we see separations and divisions with everything. The ancients, who were one with the goddess energy, one with with the right brain, they don't see separations in anything. The animate, everything was sacred. Everything is holy. And this is again how it would also appear to us if we were, merged with the right brain. And the tarot helps one. Studying the tarot, I found, helps one get in touch with that, because the Greek poet Pindar said that one race there is of men and another race of gods, but from one mother do they both arise.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is a very important fact.
What other types of symbols do we see of the goddess in our society?
That's a really humongous subject. It's just a gigantic subject, and scholars like J.J. Bachofen, who wrote this book, it's a wonderful book I brought.
Myth, Religion, and Mother, right?
This is one of the first scholars, long before it became vogue, to research and understand the power of the goddess force. But then you have Robert Graves, who wrote The White Goddess,
yes.
a very pivotal book on the subject, beautifully written, poetically written. And then you have Mircea Eliade, and in modern times you have Maria Gimbutas, who's a wonderful archaeologist and scholar of the ancient matriarchal times. Eric Newman, who wrote a book called The Great Mother, is an absolutely pivotal work. And then more recently, Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, people like that have resuscitated and pioneered research into the cult of the goddess, you see. But talking about symbols more specifically, the number 9 has always been associated with the goddess.
Yeah.
The numbers,
how is that? Why is that?
There's lots of reasons to do with gestation, the 9 months of gestation, and also the sacred number 7 and 12, anything to do with the cycle.
Right.
The lunar numbers, 14 and 28, which are the cycles of the moon.
Right.
In fact, the symbol of the circle, which is the ovum.
Yes.
The circle is nothing but the ovum.
Right.
And then the symbol of the vesica, or the womb, what they call the yoni.
Right.
This is one of her symbols, which is why churches again have doors shaped like that.
Right.
Because you're going into the most holy.
Yeah, you're going into the most holy. Yes.
And the ocean, the night sky, as I said, the cat. I mean, it's an endless subject, But one of the most revered of all of the images associated with the goddess is the tree of life. And this is something that I get into a lot in my classes and my work.
Yes.
Is this image of the tree of life, which is known as the Kabbalistic tree of life. But for thousands and thousands of years, the female body was always known as the tree of life. And the fruits that came from the tree were the ovums that the goddess gave life to, seeds placed in her womb. So when the ancients looked at the night sky, which was her body, and saw the sun and the moon, and at night you see the stars, they saw those as being seeds inside the womb of the great mother goddess.
Yes.
This is how they saw ancient things. Alternatively, and that's in fact one of the reasons why you light fireworks. As we saw at the millennium, people were lighting a lot of fireworks. That's because you're throwing seeds into the body of the goddess to say, well, we want new life.
Right.
We're hoping for a flourishing tomorrow.
Yes.
So all of these traditions come from goddess worship, because we were literally seen as living inside her body, and that the planets were like embryos in a way, which would blossom forth and give us life. So people literally felt in the ancient world that they were walking inside the body of the goddess. Now I don't know what that tells you, but that means that they lived in a very sacred way.
Yes.
And today we're raping the earth and molesting the animals and doing all sorts of things. We've completely moved away from this.
Separating ourselves from ourselves.
Absolutely. When you know that you're living inside the womb of your mother, and that's where you are, the great goddess, that totally changes the way that you perceive the planet.
Yes.
And the Egyptians and the Native American Indians and the Celtic Druids forbade themselves to cut any living thing with a sharp instrument. Compare that to today's horror, And another way of looking at it also was that the ovum, the tree of life, bears apples. So in ancient days, the apple was always the symbol of the ovum. This is a fact that's been. This has been something that the ancient scholars talked about. Because even before these modern books that I mentioned had been written, goddess worship, goddess theories had been written on in the previous centuries, and one of the things that they found was that the symbol of the apple was always a symbol of the ovum. And in fact, in the book of Genesis, when they're talking about the biting of the apple, which the Christians corrupted this myth because they wanted to disempower the female, which they succeeded in doing. I mean, they were absolutely ruthless. For instance, in Gnostic periods, after the advent of Christianity, the Gnostics tried to go back to goddess worship, and they were completely ruthlessly put down. So goddess worship went underground and comes out in alchemy and tarot. So the tarot is a much more profound thing than people realize. But the apple, as I said, was always a symbol of the female ovum. So the biting of the apple, the serpent biting the apple, or the serpent asking someone to bite the apple was always a symbol of conception, because the serpent has always been the symbol in ancient times of the sperm, spermatozoon. So when the sperm is coiling around the apple, as you see it, the apple is the ovum. So actually the serpent biting the apple or telling someone to bite the apple was always a covert, cryptic story about conception, which was always the province of what? The goddess, the female.
Right.
So Christians, the founding fathers of Christianity, the patriarchs, needed to get rid of this. They needed to get rid of the supremacy of the goddess.
And they blamed the woman again.
The whole book of Genesis was to do this. It was a propaganda mission to disempower the female. In fact, they didn't do it really that successfully in some senses, because the word Genesis still talks about the goddess, because the word Genesis, as the scholars know, means the genes or the generation of Isis. Genesis, the first book of the Bible, means generation or genes of the goddess Isis.
And Isis was the moon goddess.
Well, no, yes, she was a goddess of the moon when the lunar cult was prevalent on Earth. But see, each cult will use the goddess.
Right.
The goddess is an all-pervasive archetype, and everyone has their own use for it. But the supreme goddess, as I say. So this is, Orthodox religion, and that's why women are prohibited to have any form of doctrinal or clerical or ecclesiastical duty, because they know that if we get back in touch with the feminine, there might be a complete change in the mindset. And so there's been an absolute 100% prohibition within the Catholic Church and within Orthodox religion in general to debar women. And women don't even know really why they're being debarred. This is the whole problem. They need to find out that in the stellar cults, the lunar cult, and the solar cult and the Saturnian cult, women played a very big role. And it's only in a very, what we would call modern history, that the tables have been turned. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it, and I go into this when I'm talking about the tarot.
In your classes.
Yeah, my tarot classes are not the traditional classes on tarot. They teach you, of course, how to use the tarot, but we go into the wider areas of ancient mythology and history. And associated subjects, sacred geometry, alchemy, and definitely the role of the goddess, because if you lift any of these cards, you'll notice there's one right there, for instance. There's an example of the goddess image.
The world
universe
card.
And here's another one, Temperance, the 14th card, you see, in the tarot. So these are clearly based on the goddess, and you have at least 9 or 10 images of this goddess. And that's why, and as I said, the word tarot meant her name in the first place anyway.
Now it's been said that the tarot is a doorway into our soul. So is it a hologram of our soul when they speak that the tarot is the book of life? Is that what they're speaking about, the scholars are speaking of?
Yeah, book of life is a good term, the great book of life. And I look at it more as a living oracle. That you see, the goddess, as we've been talking, some people might be thinking that the goddess worship is something of the past. Something dated and something that only archaeologists would find interesting, or people who study ancient history. But as a matter of fact, the goddess force is all pervasive, and it's as alive today as it was before. And the way to get in touch with it is to enter into our own right brain. We have to incorporate the right brain thought or modality or way of expression. There's different ways of looking at it, and these are just terms. But when you start operating from the yin energy within you, then you are in synchronousness with the universe. And the one way that I found it's best to do that is through visuals. The tarot is better than all of the other divination arts because it's purely visual. And the mind likes visuals, just like the child mind. You see, before the child gets contaminated by the linear way of thinking, it deals with visuals. And therefore the tarot brings us back to that place and brings that sort of magic back into our life. And then by way of tarot, when you're listening to this wisdom body, it starts to take you to a different place of empowerment in your life. Because we have a habit of asking 70 to 80% of our questions to other people, who then go around asking other people for their answers. And this goes on decade after decade. And this is the reason why we reach middle age and still have only a basically hit or miss accuracy when it comes to solving our problem. Now this is not what the ancients taught. They taught about having wisdom, in your middle age and as you get older, that you should embody wisdom, not senility. So today we're going the wrong way about it. We are literally half-witted. We are people who are working with only half of the mind and only a very small part of that. So the right brain is more inclusive. It's holistic. It deals with alchemy. Alchemy sees the whole in every part, whereas physics sees the part within the whole. Physics divides and separates. Physics reduces the divine to the human, whereas alchemy takes the human up to the divine. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it, and alchemy is nothing but tarot. Tarot is the book of life. When you know its operations and its motions, you can bet that it will bring magic into your life.
So if you wanted to share with us a little bit about what types of people come to your class. Do you have Christian people come? Do you have young people come, old people, men, women, from all groups?
Yeah, from all walks of life. There's absolutely nothing segregating about it. There's people from all walks of life. In fact, since I've been working in California, I've found people from a lot of professional spheres.
Yes.
Because again, it has been used, even royalty and people behind the scenes of government have been using the divination arts to empower themselves.
Absolutely.
And I know this because I practice it, and I've given readings to people who are on the professional level, the executive level, and they seem to be benefiting from it. So it's becoming more aware now as the New Age movement has helped people to realize that there is a very practical use for this. I mean, we don't have time anymore in life for something that's not practical.
Right.
And of course, it turns out that the tarot is very practical as well. It can help you in relationships, in business, in any kind of financial dealings that you're doing. It deals with problem solving. It deals you in family situations, and of course, ultimately in your spiritual development is what it's for. But it is a very practical oracle. And the feminine, in the ancient days, the feminine was connected with the oracles.
Absolutely.
You know, when in Delphi, in Cappadocia, and all of these places in the world that were connected with sacredness, and in Celtic Ireland as well. The goddess was connected with the oracles, but you have a living oracle within you, and we in this world today, especially in the 21st century now, we need to get in touch with that oracle.
Absolutely.
And the tarot is one of the most important ways of doing that.
So it sounds like tarot is a wonderful way to invoke the goddess and the divine energy within yourself, and yet become closer to your source.
Absolutely. So, in fact, it does that very quickly.
Yes.
It does that. It helps you get in touch with your inner source, which is the goddess force. But it takes somebody of integrity and wisdom to explain it, because there's a lot of charlatanism. There's a lot of superficial research that's gone into it.
Yes.
And a lot of fetish tarots and all sorts of things out there. But there's an authentic tarot, and there's an authentic way to teach it, which is connected with Kabbalah, with numerology, and astrology. And that's what we go into.
Well, that's what we need, scholars like you, to feed the tree of life, to come alive again. Well, thank you so much for coming this evening, Michael, and speaking about it. Thank you.